Yes, we are recording now. Hold on just 1 second. Oh, okay. Alrighty, so yes, I am recording now. Welcome back. I feel like it's been a while since I have read. It has been a while. I don't remember. But last we left off, was that I remember essentially uh, Chio-chan got recruited to become. Well, first off, she tried to run away. That didn't help. She broke, I think, her arm or something. And then she met this wonderful man after, essentially being taken off of the geisha training, and she's living there as a maid. And while she was doing a chore, she came across this man that was very nice to her, who was with some geisha too. And she was just like, I'm gonna try my damnedest to be a geisha, so that way I can meet people like him or be with people like him, sort of thing. And then Mamaha, which is Hatsumomo's rival, she has her eye on Chio, and she's basically like, hey, I see a lot of potential in you. If I train you, you'll be the greatest geisha or whatever. And she was just like, this is probably just revenge on Hatsumomo and what she did to the kimono. Okay. Just need to put on some chapstick, and need to drink some water, and then we're good to go. Alright, so the next chapter is called Chapter 11. Oh, yeah, Chapter 11. Also, let me gauge how much I want to read tonight. Let me just see, like, how much I'll be able to read. Okay. Well, we'll see how long I can go. Alright, so yep. Chapter 11. I should explain just what Mama has meant by an older sister, even though at the time I hardly knew much about it myself. By the time a girl is finally ready to make her debut as an apprentice, she needs to have established a relationship with a more experienced geisha. Mamaha had mentioned Hatsumomo's older sister, the great Tomihatsu, who was already an old woman when she trained Hatsumomo. But older sisters aren't always so senior to the geisha they train. Any geisha can act as an older sister to a younger girl, as long as she has at least 1 day's seniority. When two girls are bound together as sisters, they perform a ceremony like a wedding. Afterward, they see each other almost as members of the same family, calling each other older sister and younger sister, just as real family members do. Some geisha may not take the role as seriously as they should, but an older sister who does her job properly becomes the most important figure in a young geisha's life. She does a great deal more than just making sure her younger sister learns the proper way of blending embarrassment and laughter when a man tells a naughty joke, or helping her select the right grade of wax to use under her makeup. She must also make sure her younger sister uh, attracts the notice of people she'll need to know. She does this by making She does this by taking her around Guion and presenting her to the mistresses of all the proper tea houses, to the man who makes wigs for stage performances, to the chefs at the important restaurants, and so on. There's certainly plenty of work in all of this, but introducing her younger sister around Guion during the day is only half of what an older sister must do. Because Guion is like a faint star that comes out in its fullest beauty only after the sun is set. After night, yeah, not after night. At night, the older sister must take her younger sister with her to entertain, in order to introduce her to the customers and patrons she's come to know over the years. She says to them, "Oh, have you met my younger Oh, have you met my new younger sister, so and so? Please be sure to remember her name, because she's going to be a big star. And please permit her to call on you the next time you visit Guion." Of course, few men pay high fees to spend uh, the evening chatting with a 14-year-old, so this customer probably won't, in fact, summon the young girl on his next visit. But the older sister and the mistress of the tea house will continue to push her on him until he does. If it turns out he doesn't like her for some reason, well, that's another story. But otherwise he'll end up yeah, but otherwise he'll probably end up a patron of hers in good time, and very fond of her too, just as he is of her older sister. Taking on the role of older sister often feels about like carrying a sack of rice back and forth across the city. Not only because yeah, because not only is a younger sister as dependent on her older sister as a passenger is on the train she rides, but when the girl behaves badly, it's her older sister who must bear responsibility. The reason a busy and successful geisha to all this trouble Yeah, the reason a busy and successful geisha goes all goes to all this trouble for a younger girl is because everyone in Gion benefits when an apprentice succeeds. The apprentice herself benefits by paying off her debts over time, of course, and if she's lucky, she'll end up mistress to a wealthy man. The older sister benefits by receiving a portion of her younger sister's fees, as do the mistresses of the various tea houses where the girl entertains. Even the wig maker and the shop where hair ornaments are sold, and the sweet shops where the apprentice geisha will buy gifts for her patron from time to time. They may never directly receive a portion of the girl's fees, but certainly they all benefit by the patronage of yet another successful geisha who can bring customers into Guillaume to spend money. It's fair to say that for a young girl in Guillaume, nearly everything depends on her older sister, and yet few girls have any say over who their older sisters will be. An established geisha certainly won't jeopardize her reputation by taking on a younger sister she thinks is dull or someone she thinks her patrons won't like. On the other hand, the mistress of an okia that has invested a great deal of money in training a certain apprentice won't sit quietly and just wait for some dull geisha to come along and offer to train her. So, as a result, a successful geisha ends up with far more requests than she can manage. Some she can turn away, and some she can't. Which brings me to the reason why Mother probably did feel, just as Mama has suggested, that not a single geisha in Guion would be willing to act as my older sister. Back at the time I first came to the Okia, my mother, not that, back at the time I first came to the Hokia, Mother probably had in mind for Hatsumomo to act as my elder sister. Hatsumomo may have been the sort of woman who would bite a spider right back. Hatsumomo may have been the sort of woman who would bite a spider right back, but nearly any apprentice would have been happy to be her younger sister. Hatsumomo had already been older sister to at least two well-known young geisha in Gion. Instead of torturing them as she had me, she had behaved herself well. It was her choice to take them on, and she did it for the money it would bring her. But in my case, Hatsumomo could no more have been counted on to help me in Gion than be content with the few extra young it would bring her than a dog can be counted on to escort a cat down the street without taking a bite out of it in the alley. Mother could certainly have compelled Hatsumomo to be my older sister, but not. Yeah, Mother could have certainly. Yeah, Mother could certainly have compelled Hatsumomo to be my older sister. Not, not only because Hatsumomo lived in our Okia, but also because she had so few kimono of her own and was dependent on the Okia's collection. But I didn't think any force but I didn't think any force on earth could have compelled Hatsumomo to train me properly. I'm sure that on the day she I'm sure that on the day she was asked to take me to the Mizuki tea house and introduce me to the mistress there, she would have taken me instead to the banks of the river and said, "Camel River, have you met my new younger sister?" and then pushed me right in. As for the idea of another geisha taking on the task of training me, well, it would mean crossing paths with Hatsumomo. Few geisha and Gion were brave enough to do such a thing. Late one morning, a few weeks after my encounter with Mamaha, I was serving tea to Mother and a guest in the reception room when Auntie slid open the door. I'm sorry to interrupt, uh, Auntie said, but I wonder if you would mind excusing yourself for just a moment, Kayoko-san. Kayoko was Mother's real name, you see, but we rarely heard it used in our Kia. We have a visitor at the door. Mother gave one of her coughing laughs when she heard this. "You must be having a dull day, Auntie," she said, "to come announce a visitor yourself. The maids don't work hard enough as it is, and now you're doing their jobs for them." "I thought you'd rather hear from me," Auntie said, "that our visitor is Mamaha." I began to I had begun to worry that nothing could come. Yeah, I began. Hold on, sorry. I'm like adjusting myself. Excuse me. Uh, uh, uh. Shit, sorry. Okay. Sorry, I got really lost. Yeah, I had begun to worry that nothing would come of my meeting with Mamaha, but to hear that she had suddenly appeared at our okia, well, the blood rushed to my face so intensely that I felt like a light bulb just switched on. The room was perfectly quiet for a long moment, and then Mother's guest said, Mamaha-san, well, I'll run along, but only if you promise to tell me tomorrow just what this is all about. I took my I took my opportunity to slip out of the room as Mother's guest was leaving. Then in the formal entrance hall, yeah, then in the formal entrance hall, I heard Mother say something to Auntie I'd never imagined her saying. She was tapping her pipe into an ashtray she'd brought from the reception room, and when she handed the ashtray to me, she said, Auntie, come here and fix my hair, please. I'd never before known her to worry in the least about her appearance. It's true she wore elegant clothing, but just as her room was filled with lovely objects, and yet was sorry, I'm getting really distracted. Okay, okay. Uh, where was I? Okay. It's true she wore elegant clothing, but just as her room was filled with lovely objects, and yet was hopelessly gloomy, she herself may have been draped in exquisite fabrics, but her eyes were as oily as a piece of old smelly fish, and really, she seemed to regard her hair the way a train regards its smokestack. It was just the thing that happened to be on the top. While Mother was answering the door, I stood in the maid's room cleaning out the ashtray, and I worked so hard to overhear Mama Ha and Mother that it wouldn't have surprised me if I had strained all the muscles in my ears. First, first, Mother said, I'm sorry to keep you waiting, Mama Hassan. What an honor to have a visit from you. Then Mama has said, I hope you'll forgive me for calling so unexpectedly Mrs. Nita, or something equally dull. and it went on this way for a while. All my hard work and overhearing it was about as rewarding to me as a man who lugs a chest up who lugs a chest up the hill, only to learn that it's full of rocks. At last they made their way through the formal entrance hall to the reception room. I was so desperate to overhear the conversation that I grabbed a rag from the maid's room and began polishing the floor of the entrance hall with it. Normally, Auntie wouldn't have permitted me to work there while a guest was in the reception room, but she was as preoccupied with eavesdropping as I was. When the maid came out after serving tea, when the maid came out after serving tea, Auntie stood to one side where she couldn't be seen and made sure the door was left open a crack so she could hear. I listened so I listened so closely to their small talk that I must have lost track of everything around me, for suddenly I looked up to see Pumpkin's round face staring right into mine. She was on her knees polishing the floor, even though I was already doing it, and she wasn't expected to do chores anymore. "Who is Mamaha?" she whispered to me. Obviously, she had overheard the maids talking about among themselves. I could see them huddled together on on the dirt corridor just at the edge of the walkway. "She and Hatsumomo are rivals," I whispered back. She's the one who She's the one whose kimono Hatsumomo made me put ink on." Pumpkin looked like she was about to ask something else, but then we heard Mamaha say, "Mrs. Nita, I do hope you'll forgive me for disturbing you on such a busy day, but I'd like to talk with you briefly about your maid Chio." "Oh no," Pumpkin said and into my eyes to show how sorry she felt for the trouble I was about to be in. "Our Chio can be a bit of a nuisance," Mother said. "I do hope she hasn't been troubling you." "No, nothing like that," Mama has said. "But I noticed she hasn't been attending the school these past few weeks. I'm so accustomed to running into her from time to time in the hallway. Just yesterday, I realized she must be terribly ill. I've recently met an extremely capable doctor. I wonder, shall I ask him to stop by?" "That's very kind of you," said Mother. "But you must be thinking of a different girl. You couldn't have run into our Chio in the hallway at the school. She hasn't attended lessons there for 2 years." "Are we thinking of the same girl? Quite pretty, with startling blue-gray eyes." "She does have unusual eyes. But there must be two such girls in Gion. Who would have thought? Who would have thought it? I wonder if it's possible that 2 years have passed since I saw her there," Mama has said. "Perhaps she made such a strong impression, it still seems very recent. If I may ask, Mrs. Nita, is she quite well?" "Oh, yes. As healthy as a young sapling, and every bit as unruly, if I do say so. Yet she isn't taking lessons any longer. How puzzling. For a young geisha as popular as you, I'm sure Guion must seem an easy place to make a living. But you know, times are very difficult. I can't afford to invest money in just anyone." As soon as I realized how poorly suited Chio was, "I'm quite sure we're thinking of two different girls," Mama has said. I can't imagine that a businesswoman as astute as you are, Mrs. Nita, would call Chio poorly suited. Are you certain her name is Chio? Mother asked. None of us realized it, but as she spoke these words, Mother was rising from the table and crossing the little room. A moment later, she slid open the door and found herself staring directly into Auntie's ear. Auntie stepped out of the way just as though nothing had happened, and I suppose Mother was content to pretend the same, for she did nothing more than look toward me and say, Chio-chan, come in here a moment. Oh, God. Yeah. Yeah, Chio-chan, come in here a moment. By the time I slid the door shut behind me and knelt on the tatami mats to bow, Mother had already settled herself at the table again. This is our Chio, Mother said. The very girl I was thinking of, said Mamaha. How do you do, Chio-chan? I'm happy that you look so healthy. I was just saying to Mrs. Nita that I'd begun to worry about you, but you seem quite well. Oh, yes, ma'am, very well, I answered. Thank you, Chio, Mother told me. I bowed to excuse myself, but before I could rise to my feet, Mamaha said, She's really quite a lovely girl, Mrs. Nita. I must say, at times, I've thought of coming to ask your permission to make her my younger sister. But now that she's no longer in training, Mother must have been shocked to hear this, because although she'd been on the point of taking a sip of tea, her hand dropped on its way to her mouth and remained motionless there during the time it took me to leave the room. I was nearly back to my place on the floor of the entrance hall when she finally responded. A geisha as popular as you, Mama-san. You could have any apprentice in Gion as your younger sister. It's true. I'm often asked, but I haven't taken on a new younger sister in more than a year. You'd think that with this terrible depression, customers would have slowed to a trickle. But really, I've never been so busy. I suppose the rich just go right on being rich, even in a time like this. They need their fun now more than ever. Yeah, they need their fun more than ever now, Mother said. But you were saying. Yes, what was I saying? Yes, what was I saying? Well, it makes no difference. I mustn't take any more of your time. I'm pleased that Chio is quite healthy after all. Very healthy, yes, but Mama-san, wait a moment before you leave, if you don't mind. You were saying you'd almost considered taking on Chio as your younger sister. Well, by now, she's been out of training so long, Mama said. Anyway, I'm sure you have an excellent reason for the decision you've made, Mrs. Mita. I wouldn't dare second-guess you. It's heartbreaking. The choices people are forced to make in these times. I just couldn't afford her training any longer. However, if you feel she has potential, Mama Hassan, I'm sure any investment you might choose to make in her future would be amply repaid. Mother was trying to take advantage of Mamaha. No geisha ever paid lesson fees for a younger sister. I wish I wish such a thing were possible, Mama said. But with this terrible depression, perhaps there's some way I could manage it, Mother said. Though Chio is a bit headstrong and her debts are considerable, I've often thought how shocking it would be if she ever managed to repay them. Yeah, I've often thought how shocking it would be if she ever managed to repay them. Such an attractive girl? I'd find it shocking if she couldn't. Anyway, there's no more to life than money, isn't there? Mother said. One wants to do one's best for a girl like Chio. Perhaps I could see my way to investing a bit more in her, just for her lessons. You understand. But where would it all lead? I'm sure Chio's debts are very considerable, Momoha said. But even so, I think she'll repay them by the time she's 20. 20? Said Mother. I don't think any girl in Gion has ever done such a thing, and in the midst of this depression. Yes, there is the depression, it's true. It certainly seems to me our pumpkin is a safer investment, Mother said. After all, in Chio's case, with you as her older sister, her debts will only grow worse before they get better. Mother wasn't just talking about my lesson fees. She was talking about the fees she would have to pay to Mamaha. A geisha of Mamaha's standing commonly takes a larger portion of her younger sister's earnings than an ordinary geisha would. Mamaha-san, if you have a moment longer, Mother went on, I wonder if you would entertain a proposal. If the great Mamaha says Shio will repay her debts by the age of 20, how can I doubt it's true? Of course, a girl like Chio won't succeed without an older sister, such as yourself, and yet our little Arkia is stretched to its limits just now. I can't possibly offer you the terms you're accustomed to. The best I could offer from Chio's future earnings might be only half what you ordinarily expect. Just now, I'm entertaining several generous offers, Mama has said. But if I'm going to take on a younger sister, I couldn't possibly afford to do it at I couldn't possibly afford to do it at a reduced fee. I'm not quite finished, Mama Hassan, Mother replied. Here's my proposal. It's true I can afford only half of what you usually expect, but if Chio does indeed manage to repay her debts by the age of 20, as you anticipate, I would turn over to you the remainder of what you ought to have made, plus an additional 30%. You would make more money in the long run. And if Chio turns 20 without having repaid her debts? Mamaha asked. I'm sorry to say that in such a case, the investment would have been a poor one for the both of us. The Okia would be unable to pay the fees owed to you. There was a silence, and then Mamaha sighed. Yeah, there was a silence, and then Mamaha sighed. I'm very poor with numbers, Mrs. Nita, but if I understood correctly, you'd like me to take on a task you think may be impossible for fees that are less than usual. Plenty of promising young girls in Guion would make finer younger sisters to me at no risk whatever. At no risk what. Uh, I think I found a typo. It should be whatsoever. Because it's uh, no risk whatever. I mean, that I guess that could work too, but I feel like whatsoever works better. But yeah, I'll read it just how it is. Okay. Plenty of promising young girls and Guillaume would make finer younger sisters to me at no risk whatever. I'm afraid I must decline your proposal. You're quite right, said Mother. 30% is a bit low. I'll offer you double instead, if you succeed. But nothing if I fail. Please don't think of it as nothing. A portion of Chio's fees would have gone to you all along. It's simply that the Okia would be unable to repay you the additional amount you would be owed. I felt certain Mamaha was going to say no. Instead, she said, I'd like to find out first how substantial Chio's debt really is. I'll fetch the account books for you, Mother told her. I heard nothing more. I heard nothing more of their conversation, for at this point, Auntie ran out of patience for my eavesdropping and sent me out of the Okia with a list of errands. All that afternoon, I felt as agitated as a pile of rocks in an earthquake, because, of course, I had no idea how things would turn out. If Mother and Mamaha couldn't come to an agreement, I would remain a maid all my life, just as surely as a turtle remained a turtle. When I returned to the Okia, Pumpkin was kneeling on the walkway near the courtyard, making terrible twanging noises with her shamisen. She looked very pleased when she caught sight of me and called me over. Find some excuse to go into Mother's room, she said. She's been in there all afternoon with her abacus. With her abacus. I'm sure she'll say something to you. Then you have to run back here and tell me. Then you have to run back down here and tell me. I thought this was a fine idea. One of my errands had been to one of my errands had been to buy some cream for the cookies, for the cook's scabbies. But the pharmacy had been out of it. So I decided to go upstairs to apologize to Mother for having come back to the Okia without it. She wouldn't care, of course. Probably she didn't even know I'd been sent to fetch it. But at least it would get me into her room. As it turned out, Mother was listening to a comedy show on the radio. Normally, if I disturbed her at a time like this, she would wave me in and go. She would wave me in and go right on listening to the radio, looking over her account books and puffing at her pipe. But today, to my surprise, she turned off the radio and slapped the account book shut the moment she saw me. I bowed to her and went to kneel at the table. While Mamaha was here, she said, I noticed you in the formal entrance hall polishing the floor. Were you trying to overhear our conversation? No, ma'am. There was a scratch on the floorboards. Pumpkin and I were doing what we could to buff it out. I only hope you turn out to be a better geisha than you are a liar, she said, and began to laugh, but without taking her pipe out of her mouth, so that she accidentally blew air into the stem and caused ashes to shoot up out of the little metal bowl. Some of the flecks of the tobacco were still burning when they came down on her kimono. She put the pipe down onto the table and whacked herself with the palm until she was satisfied they'd all been snuffed out. Now, Chio, you've been in the Okia more than a year, she said. More than 2 years, ma'am. In that time, I've hardly taken any notice of you. And then today, along comes a geisha like Mamaha to say she wants to be your older sister. How on earth am I to understand this? As I saw it, Mamaha was actually more interested in harming Hatsumomo than in helping me. But I certainly wouldn't say such a thing to Mother. I was about to tell her I had no idea why Mamaha had taken an interest in me, but before I could speak, the door to Mother's old room slid open, and I heard Hatsumomo's voice say, I'm sorry, Mother. I didn't know you were busy scolding the maid. She won't be a maid much longer, Mother told her. We've had a visit today that may interest you. Yes, I gather Mama had come and plucked our little minnow out of the aquarium, Hatsumomo said. She drifted over and knelt at the table, so close that I had to scoot away to make room for both of us. For some reason, Mother said, Mama seems to think Chio will repay her debts by the age of 20. Hatsumomo's face was turned toward mine. To see her smile, you might have thought she was a mother looking adoringly at a baby. But this is what she said. Perhaps, Mother, if you sold her to a whorehouse. Stop it, Hatsumomo. I didn't invite you in here to listen to this sort of thing. I want to know... I want to know what you've done to Mamaha lately to provoke her. I may have ruined Miss Prissy's day by scrolling past her on the street, perhaps, but other than that, I haven't done a thing. She has something in mind. I'd like to know what it is. There's no mystery at all, Mother. She thinks she can get me by going through Little Miss Stupid. Mother didn't respond. She seemed to be considering what Hatsumomo had told her. Perhaps, she said at last. She really does think Chio will be more successful. She really does think Chio will be a more successful geisha than our pumpkin and would like to make a bit of money off her. You can blame her for that. Really, Mother, Mamaha doesn't need Chio in order to make money. Do you think it's an incident? Do you think it's an accident she's chosen to waste her time on a girl who happens to live in the same Okia I do? Mamaha would probably establish a relationship with your little dog if she thought it would help drive me out of Gion. Come now, Hatsumomo. Why would she want to drive you out of Gion? Because I'm more beautiful. Does she need a better reason? She wants to humiliate me by telling everyone, oh, please meet my new younger sister. She lives in the same Okia as Hatsumomo. But she's such a jewel, they've entrusted her to me for training instead. I can't imagine Mamaha behaving that way, Mother said, almost under her breath. Yeah, I can't imagine Mamaha behaving that way. Mother said, almost under her breath. If she thinks she can make Chio into a more successful geisha than Pumpkin, Hatsumomo went on, she's going to be very surprised. But I'm delighted that Chio will be dressed up in a kimono and paraded around. It's a perfect opportunity for Pumpkin. Haven't you seen a kitten? Haven't you ever seen a kitten attacking a ball of string? Pumpkin will be much better. Pumpkin will be a much better geisha after she's sharpened her teeth on this one. Mother seemed to like this, for she raised the edges of her mouth in a sort of smile. I had no idea what a fine day this would be, she said. This morning when I woke up, 2 useless girls were living in the Okia. Now they'll be fighting it out, and with a couple of the most prominent geisha and Gion ushering them along. That is the end of that chapter. Ooh, there's gonna be some fucking drama spilling out. It's gonna be nuts. Like, I've already rewatched the movie, but I'm just like, man. Proxy war of yeah. Okay. On to chapter 12. Chapter 12. The very next afternoon, Mamaha summoned me to her apartment. And this time, she was seated at the table waiting for me when the maid slid open the door. I was careful to bow properly before coming into the room, and then to cross to the table and bow again. Mamaha, I don't know what has led you to this decision, I began, but I can't express how grateful I am. Don't be grateful just yet, she interrupted. Nothing has happened. You'd better tell me what Mrs. Nita said to you after my visit yesterday. Well, I said, I think Mother was a little confused about why you've taken notice of me, and to tell the truth, so am I. I hoped Mamaha would say something, but she didn't. As for Hatsumomo, don't even waste your time thinking about what she says. You already know she'd be thrilled to see you fail, just as Mrs. Nita would. I don't understand why Mother should want me to fail, I said, considering she'll make more money if I succeed. Except that if you pay back your debts by the age of 20, she'll owe me a good deal of money. I made a sort of bet with her yesterday, Mamaha said, while a maid served us tea. I wouldn't have made the bet unless I felt certain you would succeed. But if I'm going to be your older sister, you may as well know that I have very strict terms. I expected her to tell them to me, but she only glowered and said, Really, Chio, you must stop blowing on your tea that way. You look like a peasant. Leave it on the table until it's cool enough to drink. I'm sorry, I said. I wasn't aware I was doing it. It's time you were. A geisha must be very careful about the image she presents to the world. Now, as I say, I have strict terms to begin with. I expect you to do what I ask without questioning me or doubting me in any way. I know you've disobeyed Hatsumomo and Mrs. Nita from time to time. You may think that's understandable, but if you ask me, you should have been more obedient in the first place, and perhaps none of these unfortunate things would have ever happened to you. Mamaha was right. Mamaha was quite right. The world has changed a good deal since, but when I was a child, I but when I was a child, a girl who disobeyed her elders, a girl who disobeyed her elders was soon put in her place. Several years ago, I took on two new younger sisters, Mamaha continued. One worked very hard, but the other slacked off. I brought her here to my apartment one day and explained that I wouldn't tolerate her making a fool of me any longer, but it had no effect. The following month, I told her to go and find herself a new older sister. Mama Hassan, I promise you such a thing will never happen with me, I said. Thanks to you, I feel like a ship encountering its first taste of the ocean. I would never forgive myself for disappointing you. Yes, well, that's all fine. But I'm not just talking about how hard you work. You'll have to be careful not to let Hatsumomo trick you. And for heaven's sake, don't do anything to make your debts worse than they are. Don't even break a teacup. Yeah, don't break even a teacup. I promised her I wouldn't, but I must confess that when I thought of Hatsumomo tricking me again, well, well, I wasn't sure how I could defend myself if she tried. There's one more thing, Mamaha said. Whatever you and I discuss must be kept private. Yep, basically. Yeah, stop falling for it. There's one more thing, Mamaha said. Whatever you and I discuss must be kept private. You are never to tell any of it to Hatsumomo, even if we've only talked about the weather. Do you understand? If Hatsumomo asks what I said, you must tell her. Oh, Hatsumomo-san, Mamaha never says anything of interest. As soon as I've heard it, it slips right out of my mind. She's the dullest person alive. I told Mamaha I understood. Hatsumomo is quite clever, she went on. If you give her the slightest hint, you'll be surprised how much she'll figure out on her own. Suddenly, Mamaha leaned toward me and said in an angry voice, What were you two talking about yesterday when I saw you on the street together? Nothing, ma'am, I said. And though she went on glaring at me, I was so shocked I couldn't say anything further. What do you mean, nothing? You better answer me, you stupid little girl, or I'll pour ink in your ear tonight while you're sleeping. It took me a moment to understand what Mamaha was trying to do an imitation of Hatsumomo. I'm afraid it wasn't a very good imitation, but now that I understood what she was doing, I said, Honestly, Hatsumomo-san, Mamaha is always saying the dullest things. I can never remember a single one of them. They just melt away like snowflakes. Are you quite sure you saw us talking yesterday? Because if we talked at all, I can hardly remember it. Mamaha went on for a time, doing her poor imitation of Hatsumomo, and at the end said I had done an adequate job. I wasn't as confident as she was. Being questioned by Mamaha, even when she was trying to act like Hatsumomo, wasn't the same thing as keeping a wasn't the same thing as keeping up a facade in front of Hatsumomo herself. In the 2 years since Mother had put an end to my lessons, I had forgotten much of what I learned. and I hadn't learned much to begin with, since my mind had been occupied with other things. This is why, when I went back to the school after Mamaha agreed to be my yeah, this is why when I went back to the school after Mamaha agreed to be my older sister, I honestly felt I was beginning my lessons for the very first time. I was 12 years old by then, and nearly as tall as Mamaha. Having grown older may seem like an advantage, but I can assure you it wasn't. Most of the girls at the school had begun their studies much younger, in some cases at the traditional age of 3 years and 3 days. Those few who'd started as young as this were mostly the daughters of Geisha themselves, and had been raised in such a way that dance and tea ceremony formed as much a part of their daily life as swimming in the pond had for me. I know I've described something of what it is like. I know I've described something of what it was like to study shamisen with teacher Mouse, but a geisha must study a great many arts besides shamisen. And in fact, the gay of geisha means arts. So the word geisha really means artisan or artist. My first lesson in the morning was in a kind of small, uh, my first lesson in the morning was in a kind of small drum we call tsutsumi. Tsutsumi. My first lesson in the morning was in a kind of small drum we call tsutsumi. You may wonder why a geisha should bother learning drums, but the answer is very simple. In a banquet or any sort of informal gathering in Guyane, geisha usually dance to nothing more than the accompaniment of a shamisen or perhaps a singer. But for stage performances, such as dances of the old capital, every spring, 6 or more shamisen players join together as an ensemble, backed by various types of drums and also a Japanese flute we call fue. So you see, the geisha must try her hand at all of these instruments, even though eventually she'll be encouraged to specialize in one or two. As I say, my early morning lesson was in the little drum we called tsutsumi, which was played in a kneeling position like all the other musical instruments we studied. Tsutsumi is different from the other drums because it's held on the shoulder and played with the hand, unlike the larger okawa, which rests on the thigh, or the largest drum of all called taiko, which sits edgewise on a stand and is struck with fat drumsticks. I studied them all at one time or another. I studied them all at one time or another. A drum may seem like an instrument even a child can play, but actually there are various ways of striking each of them, such as such as for the big taiko, bringing the arm across the body and then swinging the drumstick backhand, you might say, which which we call uchikomi, or striking with one arm while bringing the other one at the same moment, which we call sarashi. There are other methods as well, and each produces a different sound, but only after a great deal of practice. On top of this, the orchestra is always in view of the public, so all these movements must be graceful and attractive, as well as being in unison with the other players. Half the work is in making the right sound, the other half is in doing it the proper way. Following drums, my next lesson of the morning was in Japanese flute, and after that in shamisen. The method in studying any of these instruments was more or less the same. The teacher began by playing something, and then the students tried to play it back. On occasion, we sounded like a band of animals at the zoo, but not often, because the teachers were careful to begin simply. For example, in my first lesson on the flute, the teacher played a single note, and we tried one at a time to play it back. Even after only one note, the teacher still found plenty to say. Yeah, even after one note, the teacher still found plenty to say. So and so, you must keep your little finger down, not up in the air. And you, such and such, does your flute smell bad? Well then, why do you wrinkle your nose that way? She was very strict, like she was very strict, like most of the teachers. And naturally, we were afraid of making mistakes. It wasn't uncommon for her to take the flute from some poor girl in order to hit her on the shoulder with it. Some drums, flute, and shamisen. Yeah, after drums, flute, and shamisen, my next lesson was usually in singing. We often sing at parties in Japan, and of course, parties are mostly what men come to Gion for. But even if a girl can't hold a tune and will never be but even if a girl can't hold a tune and will never be asked to perform in front of them, she must still study singing to help her understand dance. This is because the dances are set to particular pieces of music, often, often performed by a singer accompanying herself on the shamisen. There are many different types of songs. Oh, far more than I could possibly count. But in our lessons, we studied five different kinds. Some were popular ballads. Some were long pieces from kabuki theater telling a story. Others were something like a short musical poem. It would be senseless for me to try describing these songs, but let me say that while I found most of them enchanting, foreigners often seem to think they sound more like cats wailing in a temple yard than music. Yeah, but let me say that while I found most of them enchanting, foreigners often seem to think they sound more like cats wailing in a temple yard than music. It is true that traditional Japanese singing involves a good deal of warbling and is often sung so far back in the throat that the sound comes from the nose rather than the mouth. But it's only a matter of what you're accustomed to hearing. In all these classes, music and dance were only part of what we learned, because a girl who has mastered the various arts will still come off badly at a party if she hasn't learned proper comportment and comportment and behavior. Hold on. Yeah. Uh, yeah, because a girl who has mastered the various arts will still come off badly at a party if she hasn't learned proper comportment and behavior. This is one reason the teachers always insist upon good manners and bearing in their students, even when a girl is only scurrying down the hall toward the toilet. When you're taking a lesson in shamisen, for example, you'll be corrected for speaking in anything but the most proper language, and for speaking in a regional accent rather than in Kyoto speech, or for slouching, or walking in lumbering steps. In fact, the most severe scolding a girl is likely to receive probably won't be for playing her instrument badly or failing to learn the words to a song, but rather for having dirty fingernails or being disrespectful or something of that sort. Sometimes, when I've talked with foreigners about my training, they've asked, "Well, when did you study flower arranging?" The answer is that I never did. Anyone who sits down in front of a man and begins to arrange flowers by way of entertaining him is likely to look up and find that he has laid his head down on the table to go to sleep. You must remember that a geisha, above all, is an entertainer and a performer. We may pour sake or tea for a man, but we never go and fetch another serving of pickles. And in fact, we geisha are so well pampered by our maids that we scarcely know how to look after ourselves or keep our rooms orderly, much less adorn a room in a tea house with flowers. My last lesson of the morning was in tea ceremony. This is a subject many books are written about, so I won't go into much detail. But basically, a tea ceremony is conducted by one or two people who sit before their guests and prepare tea in a very traditional manner, using beautiful cups and whisks made from bamboo and so forth. Even the guests are a part of the ceremony. Yeah, even the guests are a part of the ceremony because they must hold the cup in a certain manner and drink from it just so. If you think of it as sitting down to have a nice cup of tea, well, it's more it's more like a sort of dance or even a meditation conducted while kneeling. The tea itself is made from tea leaves ground into a powder and then whisked with boiling water into a frothy green mix we call matcha, which is very unpopular with foreigners. Well, it's pretty popular now. I'll admit, it does look like green soapy water and has a bitter taste that takes a certain getting used to. Okay, if it's like that kind of matcha, yeah. But like the matcha they serve like now, yeah, that's pretty popular. Yeah, I'll admit, it does look like green soapy water, and has a bitter taste that takes a certain getting used to. Tea ceremony is a very important part of a geisha's training. It isn't unusual for a party to invite. It isn't unusual for a party at a private residence to begin with a brief tea ceremony, and the guests who come to see the seasonal dances in Guyane are first served tea made by geisha. My tea ceremony teacher was a young woman of perhaps 25 who wasn't a very good geisha, as I later learned, but she was so obsessed with tea ceremony that she taught it as if every movement was absolutely holy. Because of her enthusiasm, I quickly learned to respect her teaching, and I must say, it was the perfect lesson to have at the end of a long morning. The atmosphere was so serene, even now. I find tea ceremony as enjoyable as a good night's sleep. What makes the geisha's training so difficult isn't simply the arts she must learn, but how hectic her life becomes. After spending After spending all morning in lessons, she is still expected to work until the afternoon and evening very much as she always has. And still, she sleeps no more than 3 to 5 hours every night. During these years of training, if I'd been two people Uh, During these years of training, if I'd been two people, my life. Yeah, yeah, during these years of training, if I'd been two people, my life would have probably still been too busy. I would have been grateful if Mother had freed me from my chores as she had Pumpkin, but considering her bet with Mama Hut, I don't think she ever considered offering me more time for practice. Some of my chores were given to the maids, but most days I was responsible for more than I could manage, while still being expected to practice shamisen for an hour or more during the afternoon. In winter, both Pumpkin and I were made. Hold on. Uh, Hold on. In winter, both Pumpkin and I were made to toughen up our hands by holding them in ice water until we cried from pain. Then practice outside in the frigid air of the courtyard. I know it sounds terribly cruel, but it's the way things were done back then. In fact, toughening the hands in this way really did help me play better. You see, stage fright drains the feeling from your hands, and when you've already grown accustomed to playing with hands that are numbed and miserable, stage fright presents le- much less of a problem. In the beginning, Pumpkin and I practiced shamisen together every afternoon, right after our hour-long lesson in reading and writing with Auntie. We'd studied Japanese with her ever since my arrival, and Auntie always insisted on on good behavior. But while practicing shamisen during the afternoon, Pumpkin and I had great fun together. If we laughed out loud, if we laughed out loud, Auntie or one of the maids would come scold us. But as long as we made very little noise and plucked away at our shamisens while we talked, we could get away with spending the hour enjoying each other's company. It was the time of day I looked forward to the most. Then, one afternoon, while Pumpkin was helping me with a technique for slurring notes together, Hatsumo appeared in the corridor before us. We hadn't even heard her come in. We hadn't even heard her come into the okia. Why, look, it's Mamaha's little sister to be, she said to me. She added the to be because Mamaha and I wouldn't officially be sisters until the time of my debut as an apprentice geisha. I might have called you Little Miss Stupid, she went on, but after what I've just observed, I think I ought to save that for Pumpkin instead. Poor Pumpkin lowered her shamisen into her lap, just like a dog putting its tail between its legs. Have I done something wrong? I asked. I didn't have to look directly at Hatsumomo to see the anger blooming on her face. I was terribly afraid of what would happen next. Nothing at all, Hatsumomo said. I just didn't realize what a thoughtful person you are. I'm sorry, Hatsumomo, Pumpkin said. I was trying to help but Chio doesn't want your help. When she wants help with her shamisen, she'll go to her teacher. Is that head of yours just a big hollow gourd? And here, Hatsumo pinched Pumpkin by the lips so hard that the shamisen slid off her lap onto the wooden walkway where she was seated and fell from there onto the dirt corridor below. You and I need to have a little talk, Hatsumo said to her. You'll put your shamisen away, and I'll stand here to make sure you don't do anything. Yeah, you'll put your shamisen away, and I'll stand here to make sure you don't do anything else stupid. When Hatsumomo let go, poor Pumpkin stepped down to pick up her shamisen and begin disassembling it. She gave me a pitiful glance, and I thought she might calm down. But in fact, her lip began to quiver. Then her whole face trembled like the ground before an earthquake. And suddenly she dropped the pieces of her shamisen onto the walkway and put her hand to her lip, which had already begun to swell. While tears rolled down her cheeks. Hatsumo's face softened as if the angry sky had broken, and she turned to me with a satisfied smile. You'll have to find yourself another little friend, she said to me. After Pumpkin and I have had our talk, she'll know better than to speak a word to you in the future. Won't you, Pumpkin? Pumpkin nodded, for she had no choice, but I could see how sorry she felt. We never practiced shamisen together again. I reported this encounter to Mamaha the next time I visited her apartment. I reported this encounter to Mamaha the next time I visited her apartment. I hope you took to heart what Hatsumomo said to you. No, she did not. And yet, here she is. Oh, also, hello. I didn't notice that you were listening. I never heard the bloop. Now I'm just like, should I give you the rundown of what happened before you... Yes, I am talking about number 4. Oh my god, I didn't even notice you were there. I mean, yeah. But still. But, yeah. Or I can tell them really quick right now. So, she tried to escape. She tried to escape off the roof. She fell. She broke, I think, her arm. And then the mother was just like, I'm not gonna train you as a maid, as a geisha anymore. You're gonna be a maid for the rest of your life. And so that's what happened. And then she's just like, I have no hope. Her sister ran away. She went back to their small fishing village, and she ran away with this boy. Also, Chu's parents are dead, so she has no one left. So she's kind of forced to be at the Okia. Yeah, both of her, she can't go back now. Does the sadness never... No, it never ends. Never ends with this book, man. Never ends. Yeah, so she lives her life as a maid, and then, when she's doing, like, her chores or her errands, she runs into this guy, this man that is, that helps cheer her up, and then she's just like, I'm gonna work very, very hard in order to have the opportunity to become a geisha so I could spend my time with people like him. So her will or her purpose in life has reinvigorated itself. And now she wants to become a geisha. But in order to do that, she needs, the trust of the people in her okia, which they don't trust her because she tried to run away. And then Mamaha, which is the geisha that she ruined the kimono. I don't know if you were here for that recording, but she ruined a geisha's kimono because of uh, Hatsumomo told her to do it, and she did it. That geisha wants to be her older sister to train her as a geisha, and now you are mostly caught up. There are details here and there, but that's all I can think of, yeah. Oh, and yeah, Hatsumomo can never see her boyfriend again. Um, but yeah, that's about it. And now she's training to be a geisha again. Right now she's 12 years old. What else? What else? What else? Yeah, I think that's it. And now she's being torn away from the only friend she has because Hatsumomo was training Pumpkin to be a geisha. Ah, of course. Yeah, of course. But yeah, I will continue on then. Now that we are all caught up, I could tell you more in detail, but I will right now. So where was I? Yeah, you were gonna type something. That's why I stopped. Oh jeez. Oh nice, cool, cool. All right. Oh shit, man. My room is still warm. Today was pretty warm. All right, there we go. So, um, yeah, I reported this encounter to Mamaha the next time I visited her apartment. I hope you took to heart what Hatsumomo said to you, she told me. If Pumpkin isn't to speak a word to you, then you mustn't speak a word to her either. You'll only get her into trouble. And besides, she'll have to tell Hatsumomo what you say. You may have trusted the poor girl in the past, but you mustn't any longer. I felt so sad at hearing this. I could hardly speak for a long while. Trying to survive in an okia with Hatsumomo, I said at last, is like a pig trying to survive in a slaughterhouse. I was thinking of Pumpkin when I said this, but Mamaha must have thought I meant myself. You're quite right, she said. Your only defense is to become more successful than Hatsumomo and drive her out. But everyone says she's the most popular geisha. I can't imagine how I'll ever become more popular than she is. I didn't say popular, Mamaha replied. I said successful. Going to a lot of parties isn't everything. I live in a spacious apartment with two maids of my own, while Hatsumomo, who probably goes to as many parties as I do, continues to live in the Nita Okia. When I say successful, I mean a geisha who has earned her independence. Until a geisha has assembled her own collection of kimono, or until she's been adopted as the daughter of an okia, which is just about the same which is just about the same thing. She'll be in someone else's power all her life. You've seen some of my kimono, haven't you? How do you suppose I came by them? I've been thinking that perhaps you were adopted as the daughter of an okia before you came to live in this apartment. I did live in an okia until about 5 years ago, but the mistress has but the mistress there has a natural daughter. She would never adopt another. So, if I might ask, did you buy your entire collection of kimono yourself? How much do you think a geisha earns, Chio? A complete collection of kimono doesn't mean 2 or 3 robes for each of the seasons. Some men's lives revolve around Guillaume. They'll grow bored if they see you in the same thing every night after night. I must have looked every bit as puzzled as they did, for Mamaha gave a laugh at the expression on my face. Cheer up, Chio-chan. There's an answer to this riddle. My Danna is a generous man and bought me most of these robes. That's why I'm more successful than Hatsumomo. I have a wealthy Danna. She hasn't had one in years. I'm already in Gion. I'd already been in Gion long enough to know something of what Mamaha meant by a Danna. It's the term a wife uses for her husband, or rather, it was in my day. But a geisha who refers to her Danna isn't talking about a husband. Geisha never marry, or at least those who do no longer continue as geisha. You see, sometimes after a party with geisha, certain men don't feel satisfied with all the flirting and begin to long for something a bit more. Some of these men are content to make their way to places like Miyagawa-cho, where they'll add the odor of their own sweat to the unpleasant houses I saw the night I found my sister. Other men work up their courage to lean in bleary-eyed and whisper to the geisha beside them a question about what her fees might be. A lower-class geisha may be perfectly agreeable to such an agreement. Probably she's happy to take whatever income is offered to her. Probably she's happy to take whatever income is offered her. A woman like this may call herself a geisha, but be listed at the registry office. But I think you should take a look at how she dances and how well she plays shamisen and what she knows about tea ceremony before you decide whether or not she really is a proper geisha. A true geisha will never soil her reputation by making herself available to men on a nightly basis. I won't pretend a geisha never gives in casually to a man she finds attractive, but whether she does or not is her private affair. Geisha have passions like everyone else, and they make the same mistakes. A geisha who takes such a risk can only hope she isn't found out. Her reputation is certainly at stake, but more important, so is her standing with her Danna, if she has one. What's more, she invites the wrath of the woman who runs her okia. A geisha determined to follow her passions might take this risk, but she certainly won't do it for spending money. She might just as easily earn in some legitimate way. So you see, a geisha of the first or second tier in Gion can't be bought for a single night, not by anyone. But if the right sort of man is interested in something else, not a night together, but a much longer time, And if he's willing to offer suitable terms, well, in that case, a geisha will be happy to accept such an arrangement. Parties and so on are all very nice, but the real money in Gion comes from having a danna, and a geisha without one, such as Hatsumomo, is like a stray cat on the street without a master to feed it. You might expect that in the case of a beautiful woman like Hatsumomo, any number of men would have been eager to propose themselves as her danna, and I'm sure there were many who did. She had in fact she had a danna at one time, but somehow or another she'd so angered the mistress of the Mizuki, which was her principal tea house, that men who made inquiries forever afterward were told she wasn't available, which they probably took to mean she already had a danna, even though it wasn't true. It was damaging her relationship with the mistress. Hatsumomo had hurt no one so much as herself. As a very popular geisha, she had made enough money to keep mother happy, but as a geisha without a danna, she didn't make enough to gain her independence and move out of the ukiyo once and for all. Nor could she simply change her registration to another tea house whose mistress might be more accommodating in helping her find a danna. None of the other mistresses would want to damage their relation. Yeah, none of the other mistresses would want to damage their relationships with the Mizuki. Of course, the average geisha is entrapped in this way. Instead, she spends her time charming men in the hopes that one of them will eventually make an inquiry with the mistress of the tea house about her. Many of these inquiries lead nowhere. The man, when he's investigated, may be found to have too little money, or he may balk when someone suggests he give a gift to, or he may balk when someone suggests he give a gift of an expensive kimono as a gesture of goodwill. But if the weeks of negotiations come to a successful conclusion, the geisha and her new danna conduct a ceremony just like when two geisha become sisters. In most cases, this bond will probably last 6 months or perhaps longer. Yeah, will probably last 6 months or so, perhaps longer, because of course, men tire so quickly of the same thing. The terms of the arrangement will probably oblige the danna to pay off a portion of the geisha's debts and cover many of her living expenses every month, such as the cost of her makeup and perhaps a portion of her lesson fees, and maybe her medical expenses as well. Things of that sort. Despite all these extravagant expenses, he'll still continue to pay her usual. Yeah, he'll still Yeah, despite all these extravagant expenses, he'll still continue to pay her usual hourly fee whenever he spends time with her, just as her other customers do. But he's also entitled to certain privileges. This would be these would be the arrangements for an average geisha, but a very top geisha, of which there would be probably 30 or 40 in Gion, would expect much more. To begin with, she wouldn't even consider tarnishing her reputation with a string of danna, and might instead have only one or two in her entire life. Not only will her danna cover all of her living expenses, such as her registration fee, her lesson fees, and her meals. What's more, he'll provide her with spending money, sponsor dance recitals for her, and buy her gifts of kimono and jewelry. And when he spends time with her, he won't pay her usual hourly fee. He'll probably pay more as a gesture of goodwill. I don't, I, Jesus, I'm reading this book, And I don't know why. It has nothing to do with sushi. But goddamn, do I want sushi right now? Oh my god, I want sushi right now so bad. And I'm just say, dude, I could go for that fucking marinated tuna. Even that seared tuna sounds so good right now. Oh my god. Just like, I don't know what. Same. Yes. Oh my god. Ugh. Dude, this chapter has nothing to do with sushi or any sort of food thing. But oh my god. I just want I want sushi. Like, I don't know. And it's not even because I'm reading like, Japanese like culture. It's just like I just want to taste salmon in my mouth. I want to taste tuna in my mouth. I want to taste rice with the fish in my mouth and soy sauce. And I'm just, god damn it. I really want sushi right now. God damn. Oh, oh my god. Fuck, dude, I want sushi. Fuck. Oh, oh my god, I love sushi. I will never say no to sushi. Never, 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 never. Alright. Anyway. Anyway, before I talk about sushi some more, I'm gonna keep on reading. Okay. And when he spends time with her, he won't pay her usual hourly fee. He'll probably pay more as a gesture of goodwill. Mamaha, hold on. Okay, there we go. Yeah. And when he spends time with her, he won't pay her usual hourly fee. He'll probably pay more as a gesture of goodwill. Mamaha was certainly one of these top geisha. In fact, as I came to learn, she was probably one of the 2 or 3 best known geisha in all of Japan. You may have heard something about the famous geisha. Yeah, you may have heard something about the famous geisha Mama Mametsuki. Cool, thank you so much. Yeah, you may have heard something about the famous geisha Mametsuki, who had an affair with the Prime Minister of Japan shortly before World War One and caused something of a scandal. She was Mamaha's older sister. That is why. That is why they both have. Yeah, that is why they both had Mame in their names. It's common for a young geisha to derive her name from the name of her older sister. Having an older sister like Mametsuki was already enough to ensure Mamaha a successful career. But in the early 1920s, the Japan Travel Bureau began its first international advertising campaign. The poster showed the lovely photograph of the pagoda in the Toji Temple in southeastern Kyoto, with a cherry tree on one side and a lovely young apprentice geisha on the other, looking very shy and graceful and exquisitely delicate. That apprentice geisha was Mamaha. It would be an understatement to say that Mamaha became famous. The poster was displayed in big cities all around the world with the words "Come and visit the land of the rising sun" in all sorts of foreign languages. Not only English, but German, French, Russian, and other languages I've never heard of. Moaha was only 16 at the time, but suddenly she found herself being summoned to meet every head of state who came to Japan, and every aristocrat from England or Germany, and every millionaire from the United States. She poured sake for the great German writer Thomas Mann, who afterward told her a long, dull story through an interpreter that went on and on for nearly an hour, as well as Charlie Chaplin and Sun Yat sen, and later Ernest Hemingway, who got very drunk and said the beautiful red lips on her white face made him think of blood in the snow. In the years since then, Mama had grown only more famous by putting on a number of widely publicized dance recitals at the Kabukiza Theater in Tokyo, usually attended by the Prime Minister and a great many other luminaries. When Mamaha had announced her intention of taking me on as her younger sister, I hadn't known any of these things about her, and it's just as well. Probably I would have felt so intimidated, I couldn't have done much more than tremble in her presence. Mamaha was kind enough to sit me down and explain much of this on that day in her apartment. When she was satisfied that I understood, she said, "Following your debut, uh, following your debut, you'll be an apprentice geisha until the age of 18. After that, you'll need a danna to pay. Yeah, after that, you'll need a danna if you're to pay back your debts, a very substantial danna. My job will to be my job will to make sure you're well known in Gion by then, but it's up to you to work hard at becoming an accomplished dancer. If you can't make it at least to the fifth rank by the age of 16, nothing I can do will help you, and Mrs. Nita will be delighted to win her bet with me." "But, Mama Hassan," I said, I don't understand what dance has to do with it." "Dance has everything to do with it," she told me. "If you look around at the most successful geisha in Gion, every one of them is a dancer. Dance is one of Dance is the most revered of the geisha's arts. Only the most promising and beautiful geisha are encouraged to specialize in it. Dance is life. Dance is life." Yeah, dance is the most revered of the geisha's arts. Only the most promising and beautiful geisha are encouraged to specialize in it, and nothing except perhaps tea ceremony can compare to the richness of its tradition. The in the Ino Hopefully I pronounced this right. It's like pretty tough to pronounce. Hold on. The Inoue, Inoue. Yeah, the Inoue. Peak geisha form. Oh my god, yes. Okay. In no way. No way. Yeah, I think that's the best I'm gonna be able to pronounce it. The Inoue school of dance, practiced by the Geisha of Gion, derives from no theater. Because no is a very ancient art that has always been patronized by the imperial court. Dancers in Gion consider their art superior to the school of dance practice in the Pontocho district across the river, which derives from kabuki. Let me say that again because I was having trouble. Yeah, the Inoue school of dance, practiced by the Geisha of Gion, derives derives from no theater, because no is a very ancient art that has always been patronized by the imperial court. Dancers in Gion consider their art superior to the school of dance practice in the Pontocho district across the river, which derives from kabuki. Now, I'm a great admirer of kabuki, and in fact, I'd been lucky enough to have as many. And in fact, I'd been lucky enough to have as my friends a number of the most famous kabuki actors of the century. But kabuki is a relatively young art form. It didn't exist before the 1700s, and it has always been enjoyed by ordinary people rather than patronized by the imperial court. There is simply no comparing the dance to there is simply no comparing the dance in Potocho to the Inoue school of Guillaume. All apprentice geisha must study dance, but as I say, only the promising and attractive ones will be encouraged to specialize and and go on to become true dancers, rather than shamisen players or singers. Unfortunately, the reason Pumpkin, with her soft, round face, spent so much of her time practicing shamisen was because she hadn't been selected as a dancer. As for me, as for me, I wasn't so exquisitely beautiful that I was given no choice but to dance, like Hatsumomo. It seemed to me I would become a dancer only by demonstrating to my teachers that I was willing to work as hard as necessary. Thanks to Hatsumomo, however, my lessons got off to a very bad start. My instructor was a woman of about 50, known to us as Teacher Rump, because her skin gathered at her throat in such a way as to make a rear end there between her chin. Teacher Rump hated Hatsumomo as much as anyone in Gion did. Hatsumomo knew this quite well, and so what do you think she did? She went to her. I know this because Teacher Rump told it to me some years later, and said, "Teacher, may I be permitted to ask you a favor? I have my eye on one of the students in your class, who seems to me a very talented girl. I'd be extremely grateful if you could tell me what you think of her. Her name is Chio, and I'm very fond of her. I'd be greatly in your debt for any special help you might give her." Hatsumomo never needed to say another word after this, because Teacher Rump gave me all the special help Hatsumomo hoped she would. My dancing wasn't bad, really, but Teacher Rump began at once to use me as an example of how things should not be done. For example, I remember one morning when she demonstrated a move to us by drawing her arm across her body, just so, and then stamping one foot on the mats. We were all expected to copy this move in unison. but because we were beginners, when we finished and stamped our feet, it sounded as if a platter stacked with bean bags had been piled onto the floor. For not a single foot hit the mats at the same moment as the other. I can assure you I'd done no worse at this than anyone else. But Teacher Rump came and stood before me with that little rear end under her chin quivering, and tapped her folding fan against her thigh a few times before drawing it back and striking me on the side of the head with it. We don't stamp at just any old moment, she said, and we don't twitch our chins. In dances of the Inoue, the Inoue, no, in the Inoue, Inoue. Okay, yeah. In dances of the Inoue school, the face must be kept perfectly expressionless, an imitation of the mask. Uh, Hold on. Nope, I don't even know what this is. I'm not tapping that. I'm just putting that in the trash. I got a fucking text message from this guy, from this weird email, and it just sent me a link. I'm just like, I don't think so. Yeah, I did not click it. I just erased that message because I don't want to accidentally click it. Yeah. In dances of the Inoue theater. No, in dances of the Inoue school, the face must be kept perfectly expressionless in imitation of the masks worn in no theater. But for her to complain about my chin twitching at the very moment when her own was trembling in anger, well, I was on the edge of tears because she'd struck me, but the other students burst out laughing. Teacher Rump blamed me for the outburst and sent me out of the classroom in punishment. I can't say what might have become of me under her care if Mama hadn't finally gone to have a talk with her and helped her to figure out what really yeah, I can't say what might have become of me under her care if Mama hadn't finally gone to have a talk with her and helped her to figure out what had really happened. However, however much Teacher Rump might have hated Hatsumomo beforehand, I'm sure she hated her all the more after learning how Hatsumomo had duped her. I'm happy to say she felt so terrible about the way she treated me that I soon became one of her favorite students. I won't say I had a natural talent of any kind at all, in dance or in anything else, but I was certainly as determined as anyone to work single-mindedly until I reached my goal. Since meeting the chairman on the street, that's the name of the guy that she met that cheered her up, the chairman. Also, let me just plug in my computer. Let me just plug in my computer because it needs charging. Yes, this made in the chairman on the street that day back in the spring. I had longed for nothing so much as the chance to become a geisha and find a place for myself in the world. Now that Mama had given me that chance, I was intent on making good, but with all my lessons and chores and with my high expectations, I felt completely overwhelmed with my first 6 months of training. Then, after that, I began to discover little tricks that made everything go more smoothly. For example, I found a way of practicing the shamisen while running errands. I did this by practicing a song in my head while picturing clearly how my left hand should shift on the neck and how the plectrum should strike the string. In this way, when I put the real instrument into my lap, I could sometimes play a song quite well, even though I had tried playing it only once before. Some people thought I had learned it without practicing, but in fact, I'd learned it all up and down the alleyways of Guillaume. I used a different trick to learn the ballads and other songs we studied at the school. Since childhood, I've always been able to hear a piece of music once and remember it fairly well the next day. I don't know why, just something peculiar about my mind, I suppose. So I took to writing the words on a piece of paper before going to sleep. Then, when I awoke, while my mind was still soft and impressionable, I read the pages before even stirring from my futon. Usually this was enough, but with music that was more difficult, I used the trick of finding images to remind me of the tune. For example, a branch falling from a tree might make me think of the sound of a drum, or a stream flowing over a rock might remind me of bending a string on the shamisen to make a note rise in pitch. And I would picture the song as a kind of stroll through a landscape. But of course, the greatest challenge of all, and the most important one for me, was dance. For months, I tried to make use of the various tricks I've discovered, but they were of little help to me. Then one day, Auntie grew furious when I spilled tea and onto a magazine she was reading. The strange thing that I'd been thinking, the strange thing was that I'd been thinking kind thoughts toward her at the very moment she turned on me. I felt terribly sad afterward and found myself thinking of my sister, who was somewhere else in Japan without me, and of my mother, who I hoped was at peace in paradise now, and of my father, who'd been so willing to sell us and live out the end of his life alone. At these thoughts, as these thoughts ran through my head, my body began to grow heavy. My body began to grow heavy. So I climbed the stairs and went into the room where Pumpkin and I slept, for Mother had moved me there after Mama's visit to our Okia. Instead of laying myself down on the tatami mats and crying, I moved my arm in a sort of sweeping movement across my chest. I moved from, I don't know why I did it. It was a move from a dance we'd studied that morning, which seemed to me very sad. At the same time, I thought about the chairman and how my life would be so much better if I could rely on a man like him. As I watched my arm sweep through the air, the smoothness of its movement seemed to express these feelings of sadness and desire. My arm passed through the air with great dignity of movement, not like a leaf fluttering from a tree, but like an ocean liner gliding through the water. I suppose by that, I suppose by, I suppose that by dignity, I mean a kind of self-confidence or certainty such that a little puff of wind or a lap of a wave isn't going to make any difference. What I discovered that afternoon was that when my body felt heavy, I could move with great dignity. If I imagined the chairman observing me, my movements took on such a deep sense of feeling that sometimes each movement of a dance stood for some little interaction with him. Turning around with my head tipped at an angle. Yeah, turning around with my head tipped at an angle might represent the question, where shall we spend our day together? Yeah, where shall we spend our day together, Chairman? Extending my arm and opening my folding fan toward how grateful I felt that he honored me with his company, and that when I snapped my fan shut again later in the dance, this was when I told him that nothing in life mattered more than. And when I snapped my fan shut again later in the dance, this was when I told him that nothing in life mattered more to me than pleasing him. That is the end of that chapter. I am going to go another chapter because it's fairly short. Fairly short. How long is the other one? Pretty long. Yeah, I'm just going to do one last chapter. It should take no more than 45 minutes, maybe an hour. I'm not sure though. But yeah, we're at the 2-hour mark. Nice. Which is exactly what I wanted. So yeah, chapter 13. During the spring of 1934, because this is where the book takes place. Right before World War II. Which it does get into World War II. Spoilers, sort of. But this whole timeline goes into World War II, and then I think after. That's how it was in the movie, and I'm pretty sure that's how it's going to be in the book. But yes. So there will be some time lapses. Oh, yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah, we go through a time skip right now. Alright. Yeah, chapter 13. During the spring of 1934, after I'd been in training for more than 2 years, Hatsumomo and Mother decided that the time had come for Pumpkin to make her debut as an apprentice geisha. Of course, no one told me anything about it, since Pumpkin was on orders not to speak with me, and Hatsumomo and Mother wouldn't waste their time even considering such a thing. I found out about it only when Pumpkin left the Okiya early one afternoon, and came back at the end of the day wearing the hairstyle of a young geisha, the so-called momoware. Yeah, the so-called momoware, meaning split peach. When I took my first look at her, when she stepped into the entrance hall, I felt sick with disappointment and jealousy. Her eyes never met mine for more than a flicker of an instant. Probably she couldn't help thinking of the effect her debut was having on me. With her hair swept back in an orb so beautifully from her temples, rather than tied at the necks as it had always been, she looked very much like a young woman, though still with her same babyish face. For years she and I had envied the older girls who wore their hair so elegantly. Now Pumpkin would be setting out as a geisha, while I remained behind, unable even to ask about her new life. Then came the day Pumpkin dressed as an apprentice geisha for the first time, and went with Hatsumomo to the Musuki tea house for the ceremony to bind them together as sisters. Mother and Auntie went, though I wasn't included, but I did stand among them in the former entrance hall until Pumpkin came down the stairs, assisted by the maids. She wore a magnificent She wore a magnificent black kimono with the crest of the Nita Okia and a plum and gold with a plum and gold obi. Her face was painted white for the very first time. You might expect that with the ornaments in her hair and the brilliant red of her lips, she should have looked proud and lovely, but I thought she looked more worried than anything else. She had great difficulty walking. The regalia of an apprentice geisha is so cumbersome. Mother put a camera into Auntie's hands and told her to go outside and photograph Pumpkin, having a flint sparked on her back for good luck uh, for good luck the very first time. The rest of us remained crowded inside the entrance hall, out of view. The maids held Pumpkin's arms while she slipped her feet into the tall wooden shoes we call okobo, uh, which an apprentice geisha always wears. Then Mother went to stand behind Pumpkin and struck a pose as though she were about to spark a flint, even though in reality it was always Auntie or one of the maids who did the job. When at last the photograph was taken, Pumpkin stumbled a few steps back. Pumpkin stumbled a few steps from the door and turned to look back. The others were on their way out to join her, but I was the one who... The others were on their way out to join her, but I was the one she looked at, with an expression that seemed to say she was very sorry for the way things turned out. For the way things had turned out. By the end of that day, Pumpkin was officially known by her new geisha name. Pumpkin was officially known by her new name of Hatsumiyo. The Hatsu came from Hatsumomo, and even though it ought to have helped Pumpkin to have a name derived from a geisha as well known as Hatsumomo, in the end it didn't work that way. Very few people ever knew her geisha name, you see. They just called her Pumpkin, as we always had. I was very eager to tell Mamaha about Pumpkin's new debut, but she'd been much busier than usual lately, traveling frequently to Tokyo at the request of her Danna, with the result that we hadn't set eyes on each other in nearly 6 months. Another few weeks passed before she finally had time to summon me to her apartment. When I stepped inside, the maid let out a gasp, and then a moment later, Mamaha came out walking out of the back room and let out a gasp as well. I couldn't think what was the matter. And then when I got on my knees to bow to Mamaha and tell her I couldn't think what was the matter. And then when I got on my knees to bow to Mamaha and tell her how honored I was to see her again, she paid me no attention at all. My goodness, has it been so long, Tatsumi? Tatsumi? Yeah, my goodness, has it been so long, Tatsumi? She said to her maid. I hardly recognize her. I'm glad to hear you say it, ma'am, Tatsumi replied. I thought something had gone wrong with my eyes. I certainly wondered at the time what they were talking about, but evidently in the 6 months since I'd last seen them, I had changed more than I realized. Mama had told me to turn my head this way and that, and keep saying over and over, my goodness, she's turned into quite a young woman. Yeah, she's turned into quite a young woman. At one point, Tatsumi even made me stand and hold my arms out so she can measure my waist and hips with her hands, and then said to me, Well, there's no doubt a kimono will fit your body just, yeah. Well, there's no doubt a kimono will fit your body just like a sock fits a foot. I'm sure she meant this as a compliment, for she had a kindly look on her face when she said it. Finally, Mama had asked Tatsumi to take me into the back room and put me into a proper kimono. I had arrived in the blue and white cotton robe I had worn that morning to my lessons at school. But Tatsumi changed me into a dark blue silk covered with a design of tiny carriage wheels and shades of brilliant yellow and red. It wasn't the most beautiful kimono you would ever see. But when I looked at myself in the full-length mirror, as Tatsumi was tying the bright green obi into place around my waist, I found that, except for my plain hairstyle, I might have been taken for a young apprentice geisha on her way to a party. I quite, I quite felt proud. I felt quite proud when I walked out of the room, and thought Mama Hug would gasp again, or something of the sort. But she only rose to her feet, tucked a handkerchief into her sleeve, and went directly to the door. Yeah, but she only rose to her feet, tucked a handkerchief into her sleeve, and went directly to the door, where she slipped her feet into a green pair of lacquered zori, and looked back over her shoulder at me. Well, she said, aren't you coming? I had no idea where we were going, but I was thrilled at the thought of being seen on the street with Mamaha. The maid had put out a pair of lacquered zori for me, in a soft gray. I put them on and followed Mamaha down the dark tunnel of the stairwell. As we stepped out onto the street, an elderly woman slowed to bow to Mamaha and then, in almost the same movement, turned to bow to me. I scarcely knew what to think of this, for hardly anyone ever took notice of me on the street. The bright sunlight had blinded my eyes so much I couldn't make out whether or not I knew her, but I bowed back, and in a moment she was gone. I thought probably she was one of my teachers, but then I thought probably she was one of my teachers, but then an instant later, the same thing happened again. This time with a young geisha I'd often admired, but who had never so much as glanced in my direction before. We made our way up the street with nearly everyone we passed saying something to Mama Hut, or at the very least bowing to her, and then afterward giving me a little nod or bow as well. Several times I stopped to bow back, with the result that I fell a step or two behind Mama Hut. She could see the difficulty I was having, and took me to a quiet alleyway to show me the proper way of walking. My trouble, she explained, was that I hadn't learned to move the upper half of my body independently from the lower half. When I needed to bow to someone, I stopped my feet. Slowing the feet is a way of showing respect, she said. The more you slow up, the greater the respect. You might stop altogether to bow to one of your teachers, but for anyone else, don't slow more than you need to, for heaven's sake, or you'll never get anywhere. Go along at a constant pace when you can, taking little steps to keep the bottom of your kimono fluttering. When a woman walks, she should give the impression of waves rippling over a sandbar. I practiced walking up and down the alley as Mama had described, looking straight toward my feet to see if my kimono fluttered as it should. When Mama was satisfied, we set out again. Most of our greetings, I found, fell into one of two simple patterns. Young geisha, as we passed them, usually slowed or even stopped completely and gave Mamaha a deep bow, to which Mamaha responded with a kind word or two, and then a little nod. Then the young geisha would give me something of a puzzled look and an uncertain bow, which I would return much more deeply. Which I would return much more deeply. For I was a junior to every woman to for I was a junior to every woman we encountered. When we passed a middle-aged or elderly woman, however, Mamaha nearly always bowed first. Then the woman returned a respectful bow, but not as deep as Mamaha's, and afterward looked me up and down before giving me a little nod. I always responded to these nods with the deepest bows I could manage, while keeping my feet in motion. I told Mamaha that afternoon about Pumpkin's debut, and for months afterward I hoped she would say the time had come for my apprenticeship to begin as well. Instead, spring passed and summer too, without her saying anything of the sort. In contrast with the exciting life Pumpkin was now leading, I had only my lessons and my chores, as well as the 15 or 20 minutes Mamaha spent with me during the afternoon several times a week. Sometimes I sat in her apartment while she taught me about something I needed to know, but most often she dressed me in one of her kimono and walked me around Guillaume while running errands or calling on her fortune teller or wig maker. Even when it rained, she had no errands to run. Even when it rained and she had no errands to run, we walked under lacquered we walked under lacquered umbrellas, making our way from store to store to check when the new shipment of perfume would arrive from Italy, or whether a certain kimono repair was finished, though it wasn't scheduled to be completed for another week. At first, I thought perhaps Mamaha took me with her so she could teach me things like proper posture, for she was constantly rapping me on the back. Hold on, let me take a swig of water. But yeah, at first I thought perhaps Mamaha took me with her so she could teach me things like proper posture. For she was constantly rapping me on the back with her closed folding fan to make me stand straighter, and about how to behave toward people. Mamaha seemed to know everyone and always made a point of smiling or saying something kind, even to the most junior maids, because she understood well that she owed her exalted position to the people who thought highly of her. But then one day, as we were walking out of a bookstore, I suddenly realized what she was doing. She had no particular interest in going to the bookstore, or the wig maker, or the stationer. The errands weren't especially important, and besides, she could have sent one of her maids instead of going herself. She ran these errands only so that people in Guillaume would see us strolling the streets together. She was delaying my debut to give everyone time to take notice of me. One sunny October afternoon, we set out from Mamaha's apartment and headed downstream along the banks of the Shirakawa, watching the leaves of cherry trees flutter down onto the water. A great many other people were out strolling for just the same reason, and as you would expect, all of them greeted Mamaha. In nearly every case, at the same time they greeted Mamaha, they greeted me. Yeah, that's right. You can't just introduce someone and then expect everyone else to be like, yeah, I totally know you. Or should. But no, she's showing her around town so that people will notice that, oh, Mamaha, that the great Mamaha is strolling with this new younger girl. But yeah, yeah, in nearly every case, at the same time they greeted Mamaha, they greeted me. You're getting to be rather well known, don't you think? Yeah, you're getting to be rather well known, don't you think? She said to me. I think most people would greet even a sheep if it were walking alongside Mama Hassan. Especially a sheep, she said. That would be so unusual, but really, I hear a great many people asking about the girl with the lovely gray eyes. They haven't learned your name, but it makes no difference. You won't be called Chio much longer anyway. Does Mama Hassan mean to say... I mean to say that I've been speaking to Waza-san. And this was the name of her fortune teller. And he has suggested the third day in November as a suitable time for your debut. Mamaha stopped to watch me as I stood there, still as a tree, and with my eyes the size as... Yeah, Mamaha stopped to watch me as I stood there, still as a tree, and with my eyes the size of rice crackers. I didn't cry out or clap my hands, but I was so delighted I couldn't speak. Finally, I bowed to Mamaha and thanked her. You're going to be a fine geisha, she said. Well, you'll make an even better one if you put some thought into the sorts of statements you make with your eyes. I've never been aware of making any statement with them at all, I said. They're the most expressive part of a woman's body, especially in your case. Stand here a moment, and I'll show you. Mamaha walked around the corner, leaving me alone in the quiet alleyway. A moment later, she strolled out and walked right past me with her eyes to one side. I had the impression she felt afraid of what might happen if she looked in my direction. Now, if you were a man, she said, what would you think? I think you were concentrating so hard on avoiding me that you couldn't think about anything else. Isn't it possible I was just looking at the rain spots along the base of the houses? Even if you were, I thought you were avoiding looking at me. That's just what I'm saying. A girl with a stunning profile will never accidentally give a man the wrong message with it. But men are going to notice your eyes and imagine you're giving messages with them even when you aren't. Now watch me once more. Mamaha went around the corner again, and this time came back with her eyes to the ground, walking in a particularly dreamy manner. Then, as she neared me, her eyes rose to meet mine for just an instant, and very quickly looked away. I must say, I felt an electric jolt. If I'd been a man, I would have thought she'd given me over very... If I'd been a man, I would have thought she'd given herself over very briefly to strong feelings she was struggling to hide. If I can say things like this with ordinary eyes like mine, she told me, think how much more you could say with yours. It wouldn't surprise me if you were able to make a man faint right here on the street. Mama Hassan, I said, if I had the power to make a man faint, I'm sure I'd be aware of it by now. I'm quite surprised you aren't. Let's agree then, that you'll be ready to make your debut as soon as you've stopped a man in his tracks by just by flickering your eyes at him. I was so eager to make my debut that even if Mama had challenged me to make a tree fall by looking at it, I'm sure I would have tried. I asked her if she would be kind enough to walk with me while I experimented on a few men. Gotta stun him. Yep, you gotta stun him. Yeah, I was so eager to make my debut that even if Mama had challenged me to make a tree fall by looking at it, I'm sure I would have tried. I asked her if she would be so kind enough to walk with me while I experimented on a few men, and she was happy to do it. My first encounter was with a man so old that, really, he looked like a kimono full of bones. He was making his way up slowly up the street with the help of a cane, and his glasses were smeared so badly with grime that it wouldn't have surprised me if he had walked right into the corner of a building. He didn't notice me at all. So we continued toward Shisho Avenue. Soon I saw cute businessmen in Western suits, but I had no better luck with them. I think they recognized Mamaha, or perhaps they simply thought she was prettier than I was. For in any case, they never took their eyes off of her. I was about to give up when I saw a delivery boy of perhaps 20, carrying a tray stacked with lunch boxes. In those days, a number of the restaurants around Guillaume made deliveries and sent a boy around during the afternoon to pick up the empty boxes. It does not work on the board. No, it does not. Ugh. Yeah, in those days, a number of the restaurants around Guillaume made deliveries and sent a boy around during the afternoon to pick up the empty boxes. Usually, they were stacked in a crate that was either carried by hand or strapped to a bicycle. I don't know why this young man was using a tray. In any case, he was half a block away, walking toward me. I could see what Mamaha I could see that Mamaha was looking right at him. And then she said, Make him drop the tray. But before I could make up my mind whether she was joking, she turned up a side street and was gone. I don't think it's possible for a girl of 14, or for a woman of any age, to make a young man drop something just by looking at him in a certain way. I suppose such things may happen in movies and books. I would have given up without even trying if I hadn't noticed two things. First, the young man was already eyeing me as a hungry cat might eye a mouse. And second, most of the streets in Guillaume didn't have curbs, but this one did. And the delivery boy was walking in the street, not far from it. If I could crowd him so that he had to step up onto the sidewalk and stumble, yeah, if I had to crowd him so that he had to step up onto the sidewalk and stumble over the curb, he might drop the tray. I began by keeping my gaze to the ground in front of him, and then tried to do the very thing Mama had done on me a few minutes earlier. I let my eyes rise until they met the young man's for an instant, and then I quickly looked away. After a few more steps, I did the same thing again. By this time, he was watching me so intently that probably he had forgotten about the tray on his arms, much less the curb at his feet. When we were very close, I changed my course ever so slightly to begin crowding him so that he wouldn't be able to... Yeah, when we were very close, I changed my course ever so slightly to begin crowding him, so that he wouldn't be able to pass me without stepping right over the curb onto the sidewalk. And and then I looked and then I looked him right in the eye. He was trying to move out of my way, and just as I had hoped, his feet tangled themselves onto the curb, and he fell to one side, scattering the lunch boxes of the sidewalk. Well, I couldn't help laughing, and I'm happy to say that the young man began to laugh too. I helped him pick up his boxes and gave him a little smile before he bowed to me more deeply than any man had ever bowed to me before, and went on his way, and then went on his way. I met up with Mama Ha a moment later, who had seen it all. Perhaps you're as ready now as you'll ever need to be, she said, and with that, she led me across the main avenue to the apartment of Waza's son, her fortune teller, and set him to work finding auspicious dates for all the various events that would lead up to my debut, such as going to the shrine to announce my intentions to the gods, and having my hair done for the first time, and performing the ceremony that would make sisters of Mamaha and me. I couldn't sleep at all that night. What I had wanted for so long had finally come to pass, and oh, how my stomach churned. The idea of dressing in the exquisite clothing I admired and presenting myself to a room full of men was enough to make my palms glisten with sweat. Every time I thought of it, I felt the most delicious nervousness that tingled all the way from my knees into my chest. I imagined myself inside a tea house, sliding open the door of a tatami room. The men turned their heads to look at me, and of course, I saw the chairman there among them. Sometimes I imagined him alone in the room, wearing not a Western-style business suit, but a Japanese dress so many men wore in the evenings to relax. In his fingers, as smooth as driftwood, he held a sake cup. More than anything else in the world, I wanted to pour it full for him and feel his eyes upon me as I did. I may have been no more than 14, but it seemed to me I'd lived 2 lives already. My new life was still beginning, though my old life had come to an end some time ago. Several years had passed since I'd learned the sad news about my family, and it was amazing to me how completely the landscape of my mind had changed. We all know that a winter scene, though it may be covered over one day, with even the trees dressed in shawls of snow, would be unrecognizable the following spring. Yet, I had never imagined such a thing could occur within our very selves. When I first learned of the news of my family, it was as though I'd been covered over by a blanket of snow. But in time, the terrible coldness had melted away to reveal a landscape I'd never seen before or even imagined. I don't know if this will make sense to you, but my mind on the eve of my debut was like a garden in which the flowing I don't know if this will make sense to you, but my mind on the eve of my debut was like a garden in which the flowers had only begun to poke their faces up through the soil, so that it is still impossible to tell how things will look. I was brimming with excitement, and in this garden of my mind stood a statue, precisely in the center. It was an image of the geisha I wanted to become. And that is the end of that chapter. Well, thank you so much for listening, you guys. I will see you in the next recording.